All right, 16.3. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I already had this is the third time, guys, the third time it's been interrupted and whatever. This is going to go great. This is mechanization and the changing status of labor. The essential question for today is, how did laborers seek to advocate for their own interests in the workplace? In other words, how did workers basically fight for their rights at work? Lucky for you, there's no vocab for this section, but if you don't know what mechanization means or advocate means, go ahead and look that up. All right? Once again, you're going to do this you're going to do this Cornell note style. So hopefully you have some templates to use. If not, you can just do this on a lined sheet of paper, right? The bottom third, make it your summary. Make sure your summary is not just summarizing what you wrote on that page, but is somehow addressing the essential question. All right, some pages will speak, slides will cover that more than others, but that's okay. All right, so first we're going to start off with this dude, Frederick W. Taylor. Frederick W. Taylor, he was born in 1856 in Germantown, which is a section of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. His parents were Quakers, if you remember learning about them last year. He stayed local to the Philadelphia area his whole life. He eventually, raised a family there. They had 3 adopted children. He spent his youth studying hard, thought he was going to go to Harvard, but just like I'm sure many of you, he would be up studying way too late at night. And that actually, the lighting was different back then. That really was bad for his eyes, and he started to lose his eyesight. So he started to be an apprentice in textile factories, just like our guy Elias that we learned about earlier. So eventually he became known for a thing known as scientific management, using basically science to make factories managed better, to run more efficiently, to save money for people who were operating the factories, to save money for the business owners. But this came at the expense often of the workers, right? So you think about it. If you work somewhere and they found out because of AI, they're going to get rid of half of the employees where you work, you would not be happy, because what if you're one of those people? So he first started working with Bethlehem Steel. That's a picture of it there. Bethlehem's only like 45 minutes from here, not too far, right? We're in the industrial town similar. That's a much bigger industrial town. I might film on location there next week. What do you say? But anyway, he reduced the workforce there from 600 men to 140 men, and that's how he saved Bethlehem Steel money. Of course, if you worked for Bethlehem Steel, you may not have been thrilled about this. He eventually stopped working at Bethlehem Steel, and he became a consultant, and he consulted other companies and how they can do these things to save money as well. Like, he would literally go in with a stopwatch and see how long things took, and then see like what steps can be eliminated and what person might be able to do 2 of those steps instead of just 1, and things like that. How were things for women and children at the workforce at that time? A lot of this you probably know already. Women were usually paid less for often doing what could have been the same work. More women were working now because there were more jobs available, and some of them suited some of the skills they may have already had. A lot of clerical tasks. Now that the typewriter was invented, lots of women working on the typewriter or cash registers or things like that. So an example of the disparity here is that in some places a woman would work a 70-hour week. All right, so were men, right? That's a lot of hours in a work week. That's right, 10 hours a day. You don't take a day off. And they would only earn $1.76, whereas men could earn $7 to $10. 18% of children between the ages of 10 and 15 had jobs in 1890, and these were full-time jobs, not just, they weren't like an after-school job. Some states started passing laws restricting child labor. I know football's almost starting. I'm almost done.
Oh, I didn't want to interrupt you.
Okay.
Keep recording.
This is my 4th time. All right. Some states, like I said, passed laws restricting child labor. But some people are like, no, we want our children to work, because they relied on their money to pay just for essentials. So that became a debate. Lots of employees on the railroads, remember that was the main form of transportation at the time, started to go on strike. So for example, by 1877, There were wage cuts, which means they got paid less, layoffs, which means they lost their job, or they just had to do more work, but for the same pay. And this didn't make people happy, and sometimes this frustration turned violent. An example is an episode in Pittsburgh where 10 people were killed as a result. President Hayes sent in soldiers to stop the strike. Right, so this was not unheard of then. This was the first time used to this scale, where a president used the military to do something for business. The Knights of Labor, we're going to learn about a few different unions. They were unions that welcomed unskilled and semi-skilled workers. So basically people that might not have had like a really good skill, but still were working in a factory, on a railroad, needed some protection. Women were in the Knights of Labor, also African Americans and many immigrants. So people who felt a bit more oppressed than the average worker. There were 730,000 people in this union by 1886, so it grew pretty rapidly. One time they had a strike against railroads in the Southwest. This became violent. Others were striking for an 8-hour workday, right? They don't want to work 10 hours a day, right? So a lot of the things we think of with workday now, like how many hours or breaks or things like that, a lot of it came from the work of unions during this time period. A famous incident was the Haymarket Affair, which was in Chicago. People there were protesting police brutality because a lot of the police went in to sort of counteract the strikes. A bomb exploded, 2 people died, and everything, as you can imagine, intensifies. Companies also then started to blacklist people who were active with this union. Blacklist means like they have your name and you are not, if they see your name and you apply for a job, you are not going to work for them, right? So it started damaging people's future to be associated with some of this. Right? So start comparing and contrasting to things you might know from the news today. A different group was the American Federation of Labor, which was led by this guy you see here, Samuel Gompers. And this was an alliance of craft unions. So instead of being one union, it was like a bunch of skilled unions. So unions for people that had specific skills. And it sort of was like an umbrella union for them. They also worked to improve conditions, but maybe not as extreme as the Knights of Labor, because Gompers learned, hey, we have to be practical. If we ask for too much, we might not get it. Let's try to ask for reasonable steps. Over 2.5 million members of this by 1917. It consisted of over 111 unions. It did exclude women, right? Gompers didn't think women should even be in the workforce. So we have some other instances of famous strikes. We'll do some little case studies on these. We have the Homestead and Pullman strikes. So the Homestead strike was in Pennsylvania, and it was against wage cuts. So they were going to lose the amount of money they were making. 300 guards from the Pinkerton Detective Agency were sent in for this strike, and state troopers eventually intervened. So with the Pinkerton, imagine if companies could hire their own armies. So it's more than just a guard service. Imagine if Coca-Cola or Google had their own armies and they could fight the employees if they didn't do what they were supposed to. But the Pullman strike, employees walked off. They just walked off the job. Pullman would not negotiate with these employees. Another railway union led by a man named Eugene Debs. Some of you will learn more about him. They went on strike. Just like Hayes, now President Cleveland, he orders troops to Chicago. Debs was sent to a 6-month prison sentence. So this is basics. Like I said, some of you will be learning about one or the other, so learn a bit more about it. So why do we have this? All right. What happened now out west? We have another union, the WFM, that went on had several violent strikes in the 1890s. By 1894, they were increasing the amount of hours the people had to work, but without pay. So imagine if you had to work 8 hours a day and now 10 hours a day, but you weren't getting paid any more for it. And this was happening in a place called Cripple Creek, Colorado, which is up here. And once again here, the governor, who's up there, called in the state militia after 2 weeks of fighting. The owners finally agreed to restore to an 8-hour workday. In Idaho, the state militia was called in 3 times. Who thinks of Idaho being like some this violent hotbed? Well, state militia was called in 3 times because of fighting there. And actually, the governor up top is from Idaho. I'm sorry, it's not the one from Colorado. Him there, Governor Steinberg, he was actually assassinated over all this. You can read more about this story. It was pretty crazy. By 1905, the International Workers Union here is created, including, let me check what the IWW stands for, but included unskilled workers, just like the Knights of Labor. And this union ended right around the end of World War I. This image to the left is actually from one of these violent protests. It's evidence. It's pieces of tarred and feathered from what they would do to some of the people in these protests. What about women's unions? 1909, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. You might remember learning last year about the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. Okay, so those were garment workers. I'm not starting this over again. So this was an uprising of 20,000 women who went on strike in New York City. In 1912, you have the Bread and Roses strike in Massachusetts. So now you have women striking, showing, hey, if a woman didn't work, a lot of these companies would be in some trouble. They continued to have other groups strike. In 1903, what were they fighting for? For shorter hours, for better conditions. They also campaigned for suffrage, which is their right to vote. Because if they can vote, maybe they can have more of a say about their working conditions and elect people who they thought would help promote better working conditions. Now, was everyone in a union? This slideshow makes you think that everyone was in a union back then, but actually the majority of workers did not belong to a union. Many people were actually only hired seasonally. It wasn't like a job you had year-round. It might just be like during harvest time or something like that. So many people instead joined societies. So you may have joined the African American Colored Brotherhood or the Polish Roman Catholic Union. These societies were similar to unions but different. You paid a fee to belong to them, and they would, fight for you in a way different than a union because you may have had a variety of different jobs. But those fees would help things like provide burial costs if you were to die, especially if you were to die in the job, which happened more often back then, or benefits if you were sick. Because remember, back then, if you got hurt on the job, there was no workman's compensation, right? Your family wasn't going to get a check because you got hurt at work, right? So this would help protect you. Also, the cost of living is increasing, so people aren't getting paid more, but the cost just for bread, rent, whatever is going up. So they needed help in some other ways. This is it. We'll go into some of these stories in the future. And I'm sure I'm glad I'm finally done with this.